All right, hello everyone. It's 7:30 p.m., so we're going to get the show on the road. If everyone wants to get seated, get settled. It is Thursday, May 11th, 2023. I'm going to call this meeting of the Highland Park Planning Board to order. Annual notice of this meeting was provided to the Star Ledger, Home News Tribune, and Highland Park Planet on January 31st, 2023. In addition, notice of this meeting was faxed to the Home News Tribune and emailed to the Star Ledger and the Highland Park Planet on May 9th, 2023, and was posted on the Borough website at www.hpborough.com and on the bulletin board at Borough Hall, 221 South Fifth Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey, on May 9th, 2023, and has remained continuously posted as required by law. All right, Tanya, can we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Hand?
Here.
Mr. Brusher?
Here.
Mr. Chin?
Here.
Ms. Hadhazi? Mr. Hale?
Here.
Mr. Linares? Here. Mr. Malay?
Here. If that was me.
Mr. Perlman?
Here.
Mr. Stern Cardinal?
Here. Here.
Mr. Williams?
Here.
Mr. Eisdorfer?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Cosenza? Mr. Koch?
Thank you very much. All right, first item on our agenda tonight is a continuation hearing for JSM at Highland Park LLC. This is a continuation from our hearing at our last meeting on April 13th, 2023, when we heard testimony from the applicant but did not yet have an opportunity to address the applicant. In addition, there remain some items outstanding. Just to recap for everyone, we have some memos from our professional planners, from CME Associates, the memo dated April 7th, 2023, and from LRK, the memo dated April 5th, 2023. Those are the most recent memos from our board professionals, giving their recommendations and thoughts on the applicant's application. And we can let the record note that Ms. Hadhazi has joined us. And not to call you out, I'm sorry about that. But you're here. And during the previous hearing's testimony, we reviewed all of the items, but held back and held reservation for the applicant to make additional statements about items 15 and 31 of the CME Associates planning memo, and item 7.9 of the LRK memorandum, as well as there was an additional comment to item 7.13 about generator housing. But the applicant agreed to add the generator housing. So it's those three items from CME, item 15 and 31, and from the LRK memo, item 7.9, that I'll let the applicant continue their presentation upon.
Just want to go back and look at 7. I don't remember what that is.
7.9 was the tree plan.
So, for the record, I'm Doug Wolfson. Thanks for having us back. I appreciate being here. I appreciate all of you being here. I'm glad you put on the record that Ms. Hadhazi's here. It's not getting called out. It's just being careful. It's a lawyer's lot in life. So we're here to continue and hopefully tie up our application today for the property known as Buck Woods. I agree with the summary set out on the record by the chair. We did go back and look at 15 and 31 on the April 7 memo from Mr. Koch, the engineer. We cannot agree as it's written in terms of the things that are there, but I think if you read carefully, I think what Mr. Koch is saying is that we need to discuss and figure something out on those issues. And we're open to suggestions from Mr. Koch and or Mr. Thomas as to how best to address that in a way that satisfies the board and doesn't unduly burden the property.
Thank you. With that, let me just go through item number 15 on Item number 15 on Mr. Koch's report. It has to do with
I don't want to read it per se, but it's essentially, and Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, that has to do with the information involving the sanitary sewer engineering report needs to be revised to include calculations to demonstrate the adequacy of both the proposed portion of the sanitary sewer system and the existing sanitary sewer downstream, so that those calculations can be done. There was a concern with regard to that as raised by by the applicant. There has been discussions with regard to that, and I think that the situation can be addressed as follows, that it is my understanding, based upon discussions between the two engineers, that the study, as far as the sanitary sewer is concerned, amounts to putting in some monitors, I believe is the proper term, and if I have a different term that needs to be put in, flow meters. Thank you very much. Right. And those flow meters will then be installed at appropriate locations, and then will be recording data for a period of approximately 30 to 45 days, as I understand it. And thereafter, it will determine whether or not there is an issue with regard to flow, or there's not. If there's not an issue, then that ends the question. If there is an issue, then I think that what will happen is that this matter, as a condition of a developer's agreement, which there is going to be a requirement for this developer to engage with a developer's agreement with the borough, there will be a requirement that the parties then attempt to amicably resolve those issues. If they cannot, then it would appear that the appropriate way to go is to return to court. This is a matter that has been the subject of litigation regarding affordable housing. There has a judgment assigned, and it would be returned to the appropriate affordable housing judge for further discussion and determination. So we think that that's a reasonable approach, and I want to just get concurrence by Mr. Koch that I have adequately and appropriately outlined what I think is the general consensus that has occurred between the engineers as to how this can be handled for not only the safety of the future residents of this particular project, but also for the borough residents as well.
Yes, you're correct, Mr. Thomas, but there may have to be a little more to it, such as some surveying work and some analysis of the line slopes, capacities, and a small report. But I think the flow meters are going to be the easier way to approach it, and then we'll know whether there is a need for an upgrade or if everything will work with the new flows being generated by the development and discharging to the line.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Mr.
So,
Wolfson,
Scott,
do you have any
so-
comment with regard to that suggestion?
Just a clarification question. So as I understand it, if the board is going to approve the project, it would include a condition that says we work with the township engineer as to the number or location of meters or monitors, and then prepare whatever he believes is necessary to satisfy him that there is either a problem or not a problem. We okay with that, Ron?
That is my understanding. You
We're-
did it
we're good with that.
quicker and simpler than I did, but yes, that's exactly the case.
I'm not sure it was any better, but since my guy agreed to it,
And that's all that matters.
We're okay.
Okay.
We're okay
As long
with
as the
that.
two engineers agree, that seems to be the issue. With regard to number 31, it is a related issue. The first one was the sanitary sewer. The second one is the stormwater issue. It's essentially the same thing. Mr. Koch, in his report, raised some concern in item number 31 as to making sure that there is adequate flow that will continue to occur after this development is put in place. And in order to accomplish that, he had made recommendations in relation to, again, studies. After further discussions, there was, again, an understanding, as I gather, by the engineers that a similar process will occur. This one, I don't believe, is going to include flow meters, but it will include, and I'm going to actually go to Bruce to maybe define more or less what that process will be. But nonetheless, it will be taken on by the developer, and then the information will be shared with the board's engineer, the borough's engineer, and either there will be a result that indicates there is no problem with regard to the stormwater flows with this additional project, or there will be. And then the same process will apply because it will be the subject of the same developer's agreement, and as a result, the parties will attempt to amicably resolve it, and if they can't, this also will go back to the affordable housing judge. Maybe you could outline specifically, because I think it's a little different in terms of the mechanism as to how that process will take place that is going to be taken on by the developer. Bruce.
And the applicant will do calculations, and we've helped a little by giving some topographic mapping that's available, we have available. So they'll analyze the upstream drainage area, determine what the runoff is now, route that into, see how that flows through the bigger downstream pipe, and then route their flows into it and see what the combined flow is, and how, and if and how the pipe is able to handle it. If it's able to handle it and the velocities are adequate, then it's a moot point. We just want to make sure there's not going to be backup and flooding. And as you indicated earlier, if we find there is an improvement needed, then that'll be the part of the developer's agreement or returning to the courts if it's not easily resolved.
Mr. Wolfson.
Mr. Almbach, we okay with that as well?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Or you want
Yeah,
to wait to the
you
end?
certainly can. That was really essentially where I am. That's it.
No, it's not about what you all are doing, but essentially, what's the impact on the residents? Because somebody has to be there to generate flow. So you come up and you find out, well, we have a problem. And as that's getting resolved, what's going to be the impact on the residents? I mean, can you resolve something like that without shutting down the system, so to speak, especially with the sewer? Or am I not thinking straight?
We'll have to see where the system's flows are.
Okay.
What the peaks are.
Mhm.
Put the peaking factor on it, and see how the pipes are flowing. If they're flowing half full, or if they're at 80% capacity, and the flows from this site are able to.
So you'll be checking this before the construction of the building goes
Yes.
up? Is that
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, that was, that was my one clarification, because I was hearing flow, so it's, so in other words, you're going to put the pipes in and run water through it and figure
Correct.
out what's going on? Okay.
That would absolutely be a pre-construction condition to verify this, so that exactly the concern that you have, Pedrick, is that, we don't have a building, and then we got a big problem.
I hear you.
So,
Thank you.
Bruce, what's the time frame on the testing?
Excuse me.
No, just the length of the test.
Well, I think the metering, I'm hesitating because we don't know what the weather is.
Right.
And you try and get a couple good storms in because there's infiltration and inflow, and you really want to see not dry weather flow, but what the
Sure.
worst case scenario is, so we know how the pipes are managing with it. So,
So
as Roger said, ideally 30 to 45 days.
okay.
This time of year would probably work well. If we wind up doing it in the summer, sometimes you gotta wait till September
Sure.
to October to get wet
Okay.
weather. It all depends upon what Mother
Sure.
Nature gives us.
Mhm.
It's ideal to get 2 good storms or decent rainfalls through it because it gives you some information. That's all.
Thank you.
Construction is a long way off,
Yeah.
even assuming
No.
an approval. There's other litigation that needs to be resolved, and doesn't have a trial date or anything, so.
there is also another issue that has been raised by one of the board members to me, and I've raised that to you, Mr. Wolfson, but I want to put it on the record, and that is, as we've talked about, any approval of this site will, of course, include the fact that this site will be safe for residential use, without question. In order to accomplish that, it will be your client's obligation to end up hiring an LSRP. You, of course, know what that is an individual who is designated now by the DEP to monitor and make sure that cleanups, in fact, occur. That's my understanding of the new regulations. When I say new, I gather over the last 5 or 6 years. In any event, what has been requested by one of the board members, who happens to be also the representative from the Environmental Commission, is that there will be then a report and or study, whichever you want to call it, that will go to the LSRP for review and then ultimately approval, which will then presumably be reported to the DEP. The Environmental Commission is requesting a copy of that report when it goes to the LSRP. I don't think that's an unreasonable request, because it's a document that's going to be public eventually anyway. So is there any problem with that?
No issues with that.
Very good. Thank you.
I believe it's a condition in my report.
That may be true, and if it is, then it's duplicitous, but I did want to get it on the record because I know, actually, it was Mr. Williams who contacted me and wanted to make sure that something along that line would occur. And if it's in your report, great. Now we have it twice.
I want the record to reflect that you called Mr. Koch duplicitous.
That's not the worst that I've ever called them.
Just teasing, just teasing.
All right.
We've all been called worse.
As for your application, under my notes, that just leaves LRK bullet point 7.9 for your position on that.
Right. Well, this is
issue.
more complicated, and we really hadn't discussed that in any real length. And frankly, the situation is fluid to some extent. The borough, and perhaps the planning board members may be aware that because of the site contamination, required testing to be done. And there was some dispute about our right or ability to get onto the site to do the testing to undertake and find whether or not, as we suspected based on our original sort of view of the site, that there was a problem. So that resulted in litigation which was instituted by us, which resulted in a court order that directed that we were allowed to go onto the site in order to remove trees which were necessary to get the machinery onto the site so that testing of the soils in various places where the residential units were intended to be placed could be done. And there were two different court orders because there were two different situations when the borough attempted to stop us from doing that. In any event, in both of those instances, we were successful in convincing the court that we needed to be able to do those things. And now that we've done those things, we have now confirmed that there is a serious contamination problem on the property, which Council Mr. Thomas has referred to, which isn't a secret anymore. The court has already determined that the cause of the contamination was actions by the borough. So that's already been decided by the court. The borough is responsible for the cost of the cleanup in order to make the property safe. That amount of money, or the manner in which the cleanup will be resolved, is a matter of dispute. Not that I want to argue that case today. Our client, the Edgewood Property subsidiary here and principal, has never accepted a cap situation, which the DEP occasionally will accept, meaning covering up the contamination. Our position has always been, yeah, DEP might accept it, but 20 years from now and everybody's getting cancer, I don't want to leave my kids with the problem of this contamination. So he has, as a matter of practice for 40 years, cleaned contaminated properties that we've bought. We have our own excavation division and cleanup division, and we have actually a specialty in this state and others where we clean up brownfield and other properties. And believe it or not, there are places in states like Ohio and South Dakota and Iowa that will accept this stuff in their landfills. Problem, of course, is the cost of carting is a very high cost, and that's really what the lawsuit is about with the town. The town was saying, just cap it, and we're saying, no, we don't want to cap it. It's our property. You dirtied it. We're entitled to it clean. That's the fight. What the judge will do ultimately, I can't answer. I don't know. But nothing will happen with the LSRP or anything until that's resolved, however the court decides to do it. And even if we lose, my guy may say, I'll do it anyway, but that difference may be at our cost. So I know it's a long-winded way of getting to where we are, but as a result of that, we don't think that the tree removal ordinance can apply to us because we need to empty that site or cap the site, but either way, it's because of the townships or the boroughs having polluted the site. So we have to remove the trees, whether we do a cap, which we're opposed to, or a dig out and cart away. So I apologize, but there is no way that legally I could advise my client that we should be responsible for any tree removal or replacement because all the trees are being removed because of the conduct of the borough.
I think that the only answer to that is that it is a subject of litigation, and while the borough does have a tree removal ordinance, it is in some degree going to be superseded by this litigation, and I believe that there will be discussions, as I understand it, with regard to a number of issues, and one of the issues I'm sure that will occur will include what level of tree removal will occur and what remediation will occur. And I'm sure that's going to be part of any discussion in terms of litigation. So I think it would be appropriate that a condition of this approval, if there is one, would be to indicate that the outcome of any tree remediation would be the subject of the ultimate determination of the litigation that's now pending.
I would love to say yes to that,
Okay.
because it's an easy fix, but that issue is not presented in the context of the litigation. What's left, because there were summary judgments already entered in the case, the only thing that's left is whether or not the borough's position that we should be required to accept a cap, which is a lot less money, obviously, or whether we prevail and say we don't have to accept the cap. So is it a $300,000 fix, or is it a $4 million fix? So, but either way, the trees have to come down, whether it's a cap or dig out, cap two.
Well, what I'm really
Judge McCluskey won't be deciding whether the trees are going to be removed. They have to be removed.
Let me rephrase it then. What I would suggest then is that depending upon the ultimate determination of the court as to how the remediation will occur, cap versus dig out, if you want to call it that, it will then require the removal of trees. And that's going to be something that is going to be required in order to make the site safe. And I'm sure this board, understands that. There can be, however, discussions, I think, with regard to the borough and the applicant to attempt to try to preserve as many trees as possible, given the circumstances that the property now finds itself. Can you end up being in a position to have the literal language of the tree removal ordinance apply in this case? No, I don't think so, but I think there can be a mutual agreement to try to preserve whatever there can be, and you've already got a landscape plan that's going to be providing for additional trees as part of the ongoing project. So I think that maybe as an alternative, that might be a valid way to go. And Ron may have something to add, I don't know.
Yeah, as Ronnie said, I was about to say, I thought that's actually a pretty good way to approach the problem. There may very well be trees that are not implicated under either cleanup, certainly the ones that are in the perimeters or on the slopes. And as Ron pointed out, it's in our interest to preserve trees on slopes because it prevents erosion to a large extent. So I think that, once again, your cleverness has proven helpful. So we would agree that we will work with your professionals and try to figure out which trees can be saved depending upon how the property is ultimately cleaned.
I will try to draft a condition. It'll be along that line, and of course, as my process has always been, or my procedure has always been, that when I do draft an approval resolution, it obviously goes to the staff, it goes to the board members, and I also send it to the applicant's attorney. So if
Appreciate
there's some
the courtesy.
if there's some modification to that language, we can talk about it. But I believe that the suggestion, with your acceptance, and I appreciate that, is a reasonable way to go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So is it a fair summary to say that other than the 1, 2, 3 items that we've talked about this evening on the CME Associates and the LRK letters, all the remaining conditions the applicant agreed to comply with?
I think that's correct. Ron? We agreed or we testified as to...
There's been a lot of testimony that has occurred at the last meeting. I have 3 pages of notes along with handwritten notes of about 7 pages, and I do have that information available to me. So there was an agreement generally with some modifications that were discussed at the last meeting, and I will again attempt to incorporate them into a resolution. That will be reviewed by the members of the board as well as the applicant.
We will endeavor to get a transcript so that we can send it to Mr. Thomas. That will assist him in what we agreed to and what
Sure.
was asked. Make
It's
sure
also
they're-
available on YouTube for anyone who wants to go back and watch.
It takes too long to listen, but it's fair. When you read it, it's quick. So
If you
we'll
have
get
such a
We'll get
thing.
a transcript to you.
Okay, that's fine.
And to us, so we remember what it is that we said okay to.
All right, before I open it up to questions from the board, is there anything else the applicant wants to add?
No, that's our case, Madam Chair. We're satisfied with the proofs that we've submitted through Mr. Allenbach and Ms. Cofone, and also very appreciative of the creativity and sensitivity to the situation by Mr. Thomas and Mr. Koch. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. So I'll open it up to members of the board who have questions or comments for the applicant. Jeff?
I guess. All right. So I had brought up an issue at the last meeting, April's meeting, about some off-track improvements. And first off, want to note that there are some off-track improvements. Notably, there's a sidewalk. Looks like it's being constructed along South 6th Avenue to the corner of Mansfield, and perhaps a restriping of a crosswalk across South Mansfield Street. So, and these are, of course, these off-track improvements are, related to generated pedestrian activity on the site. So along with that line and establishing that off-track improvements are a reasonable request, I did bring up last month that the site also, because of the high number of 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units, about 65% of the 75 units proposed is family sized. And given that this is, which is a good thing, that there are a lot of families that will be living in this project, that there will be a suitable need for children recreation. And so I did call the applicant's attention to 3 parcels, town-owned parcels at the corner of South 6th and Mansfield Street. And a request that I did make was to regrade the land so that a potentially a playground, a child playground could be built there. And again, when I asked questions about any sort of amenities, the amenities that are proposed in the building, the answer was there were not going to be any child-oriented amenities in the building, and nor is there in the plans any outdoor child amenities on the site. So it makes sense. There is an impact. There will be an increased demand on the borough's playgrounds and such, that it is a reasonable request that an off-track improvement be made by the applicant for the 3 parcels that are immediately adjacent to the applicant's property. And so I'm going to ask if the applicant has had a chance to talk to the JSM and Edgewood Properties about whether that's possible.
Yes, I did have an opportunity, and, sorry. I did have an opportunity to talk
And
to...
and again, just, if you don't
sorry.
mind, just for the record, just identify yourself.
Sure. Again, my name is Ronald Allenbach, Aullenbach.
And Mr.
Director-
Rom, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Director of Engineering Planning and Development for Edgewood Properties, the parent company.
And just so that the record's clear, you were previously sworn and remain under oath, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No worry, thank you. Yeah, I did get an opportunity to talk to the ownership, and, we understand the sensitivity, and we would feel more comfortable if the board was so inclined to look at putting what I'll refer to as a tot lot or a playground structure, that we prefer to find a location on our site to put it. There is a public walkway that will cut through the site. There is areas down the bottom of the site, of the southern portion of the site. As you're familiar with those lots that are borough-owned lots, and we looked at these lots, I think, for years when we were going through the process of the ordinance change and everything. There's grading on that property that's steep as it approaches our property, and what we're afraid of is that you start getting into, we'll do some slight grading, and next thing you know, we're installing retaining walls, and then you've got the playground structure, and it just starts snowballing. So if the board was inclined to request for a play structure, playground structure, tot lot, whatever phrase you want to use, we'd be more inclined to put it on our site, find a location that's acceptable to the engineer and planner, but put it on site rather than putting it off-site and getting involved with some additional off-site improvements.
And would that be because the walkways are accessible to the public outside, that the playground / tot lot would also be accessible to residences that are moving along the area?
That gets a little tricky.
Yeah, I have, some liability issues with that. So if you want us to put something on our site, it would have to be, we would have to have the option of limiting it to tenants or owners, depending on how we market this property.
Okay, I do appreciate it. I just make note that there are other developments in town where there is public accessibility, where playgrounds have been installed and there's been public accessibility. South Adelaide and River Road and Riverton Avenue, that 19-unit townhouse, the playground was placed in a walkway to the sidewalk at the corner, and it's open to members of the public, and I don't think they have any legal liability issues.
I don't take issue with the fact that it's a nice idea and it's a good thing for the town. It's not in your ordinance, which was a very extensively negotiated, litigated situation over a period of years. It was not included. Mr. Allenbeck's indication that we would be willing, despite the fact that it's not in the ordinance, to do something on our property. I recognize that that's maybe less than what you want, but I can't, in good conscience, say we're going to go onto property that we don't own and undertake the liability aspects of what's going to happen with what we graded, don't grade it. There's steep slopes, retaining walls have to be made. All of a sudden, it's not putting a grader on there and evening out the dirt. Now it's also engineering problems and expenses, and then serious liability problems. Somebody falls off a retaining wall, it's not properly, monitored by the town. It's your property, not ours. So I guess my long-winded response to the request is, if the board wants to impose a condition on our property that we meet with Mr. Koch and the planner and find a suitable location for some kind of recreational location, tot lot as we call it, we're prepared to do that, notwithstanding my view that it could not be required, but we would agree. But we can't agree to do work on property we don't own and expose ourselves to the liability, years from now even, as to what's going to happen. We just won't do it.
Jeff, let me just respond. I don't know those particular developments. I'm sure they occurred. My assumption is that they occurred on the basis that the then applicant did not have any amenities at all on site. What the applicant is offering is an amenity on site, which I think is something that I do understand the concern for liability. The issue, though, is twofold. One, if they're offering something as an amenity with regard to recreation that they had not done before, I think that goes a long way toward the concern that you have. I know that you would like to have other, potentially have other locations, but I think if they've now made the decision to do it on site, I think they have the right to do that in a location that is acceptable to your consultants. I do recognize that I don't know what those other sites were about, but I do know that this site is in fact an affordable housing site, and there is a lot of case law that talks about making sure that affordable housing sites are not unduly burdened with excessive expense that would then make it more difficult for affordable housing to occur in this state. There's a whole series, of case law that talks about that. So I think that their offer, if they hadn't offered, maybe there's a little bit more to be said about that. But since they have offered to have a recreation facility on site for their residents, I think they are taking into account your concern, maybe not fully, but I do think from a legal viewpoint, they are probably going as far as they are legally obligated to do.
And then I was just, I guess, also thank you. But I think I would also ask that, that whatever tot lot or site, I think if you're going to consult with the engineer and the planner, I think that it should be substantial enough to address the recreation needs of the residents. Then.
I'm sure that your engineer and planner will take that into account. At least I have no doubt they will.
Your guys are pros. I'm sure we can work this out.
I have a question. How close are you to resolving the litigation issues?
Roger's just in a position as I am. They've shut down trials in several counties. I know Middlesex County is down 3 or 4 judges, with one set to retire in a few weeks or a month, Mr. Jorgensen. So he's a family court judge, which means somebody from civil is going to be moved over to the family court, because that's a crisis location. Civil is the last thing to get priority. Criminal is high priority because of Speedy Trial Act, and family is important because of crisis. So it could be, and the judge who they sent the case to was recused because his partner used to be our lawyer. So it's going to go back to the assignment judge or the presiding judge is going to be reassigned, and whoever the new judge is, she or he, is going to have to try to get up to speed over 3 years of litigation.
So what that really means is that there's no real definition as to when it's going to occur.
Yeah, what he said.
When it happens, and I wish, it sounds like an obfuscation, but the court
Understood.
system is
Understood, Roger.
Mess.
My next question is, pending approval, if we do approve, does that bear any role in the litigation, our approval of the project?
not really. I think that no. The simple answer is no. I don't believe that there's anything that's going to be taken advantage of by the borough to say, look what we've done, Judge. Or I don't
Right.
think there's anything that
They've already approved it.
Yeah, that the applicant is going to be saying, taking it in some advantage or the like.
Well, then why are we hearing the application now?
Well, because they have brought it, and you have an obligation as a board to
Timely
hear it
manner.
within a timely
Got it.
fashion.
Thank you, Roger.
So-
It's actually
Unless we all
part of the
retire.
negotiations,
Yeah.
that it wouldn't be held up by virtue of the litigation. Remember, the litigation is
There's
just
a-
about how much?
There's a multi approval process. It's not just this board. It's the DEP. It's various other boards that need to be. So the municipal land use law recognizes that you start someplace, and usually it's here, and then any approval here would be subject to outside agency approval, and that
But
of course.
the completion it wasn't 100% completed. It was the application's deemed complete.
Oh, we're past that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're past that a long time ago.
Okay, thank you.
Kalasia?
Yes. On our last meetings, it ran like very, very, very late, and we didn't get a chance for a public comment. But I believe in our last conversation, where we left off, we were discussing the retaining wall and the 8-foot setback versus 20-foot setback.
Excuse me.
And I think, if I remember correctly, we were talking about if the retaining wall's placement was topographically necessary. And I believe you gentlemen were in the process of explaining that before we adjourned last month.
Caledra, it must have been a good question. You're making him bring his easel out, and now he's going to bring out pictures. I understand. The original submission. Yeah, so we don't need to mark it. But it would be helpful for the record if you could identify the sheet you're going to be testifying from. Ron, if you could identify the sheet, please.
Sure. The sheet's entitled Proposed Landscape Plan for Gabrielle Estates, sheet 2225. Last revision is March 24, 2023. So, obviously, if you're familiar with the site, I know you are because you grew up in the area, it's like a V, the site, and we're building in the middle and working our way out. So you have to flatten out the bottom in order to put the building in, and you can't have those very steep slopes along the side. So what you have to do is there's requirements to place these retaining walls. What further complicates is when the fire department and fire marshal required a road all the way around all four sides of the building for fire access. So what we had to do here was, rather than having one wall that might be 16, 18 foot tall, we stepped the building, stepped the wall. So we come off the property line, we have a wall, goes down 6 or 8 feet, there's a flat plateau, then there's another wall that goes down. And those are placed in areas, obviously, that are sensitive to existing topographic. The top of the wall meets the existing topo that leads up to the existing lots, and then you're making up the grade by virtue of the retaining wall. So you make up that 5 or 6 foot drop, then you have another plateau where you have landscaping, then you have another wall to make up that additional drop. So those are placed, and those are reviewed, obviously, by your engineer, in areas that are necessary to put them there in order to stabilize the upstream or upslope, as well as stabilize what we're doing down below, if you will.
I don't mean to interrupt, just
Sure.
so that I'm trying to visualize what you're explaining. So the way that the retaining walls are stepped, is that reflective on both sides of the building? Is that how the retaining walls are going to be built on both sides of the property?
What I'll refer to as the west side is
Or,
not.
or at least the lower part
The
on
lower
that
part of the
particular
page.
map.
Starts Fifth,
So
South
this
Fifth,
is
yes.
South Fifth, the
Right,
lower
South
part,
Fifth is down
and
here,
South
correct.
Seventh is
South
the
is
upper
up.
part.
That side doesn't have severe topo, so we don't have a step wall, we only have a single wall. The upper side does have that stepped scenario because it's much steeper on that side. And that's the area where we didn't have the step wall until we introduced the additional lane for the fire truck. Once they introduced that, then we had to step the wall in order to pick up that additional topo. Because soil erosion and the township ordinance, I'm pretty sure the township ordinance, requires you that you can't have slopes steeper than 3-on-1, and that's to provide for erosion. The minute you go past 3-on-1, you have to install walls in order to mitigate that, so you don't violate that provision in soil erosion and the borough's ordinance.
So can you tell us from the distance from that first, the highest part of your retaining wall, the highest, like that first tier, from that first tier to the third tier, all the way at the bottom where you hit like ground level, what is the distance between that? From, well, not from top to bottom, more like the width?
The width, yeah.
Yeah.
And it might also be helpful, Mr. Aaronback, to indicate what the dimensions are between the cantilevered walls. That might help as well.
And the actual distance between the building walls and the property line, because I don't think it's 8 feet, which is what the variance might otherwise hint at.
Well, the road is what caused that 8-foot issue.
Right, no, I understand that, but what is the distance between the actual outer wall of the building and the property line on each side? Not accounting for steps. Because on some of these documents, it looks like almost 50 feet on each side.
Okay, just so I'm clear on your question, because I thought the first question was the distance to the wall. I think you meant the retaining wall, now you seem to be talking about the building wall.
No, I'm well, it's two different questions.
Let's focus
Yeah,
in on
there-
the first question.
There's two different questions. The first question was the retaining walls. The distance between where the top tier retaining wall begins and that width from where the bottom tier retaining wall ends.
So, we'll start off on the 7th Avenue side. You have the property line, then you have 10 feet to the first retaining wall. Then it drops down, and then you have 8 feet where it levels off, then you have another retaining wall.
All right, so just so that I understand. So you have the 10 feet to the first wall, then you have the wall, then you have another 8 feet in between the two walls? Is that what your testimony is?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the dimension, 6 feet
6 feet,
to
okay.
the second wall, correct.
All right.
And then you have the fire lane, and then you have another retaining wall on the other side of the fire lane before you get to our building.
And the fire lane is how wide?
18 feet, 17.7 at this location here.
Got
In
it.
the middle of the site, sorry.
Okay, so is your testimony that the retaining wall, the distance between where your emergency fire lane starts and the top tier of the retaining wall is about 16 feet? Or is it more than that?
From the wall itself that abuts the emergency access,
Right,
you have 6 feet to the next wall, and then you have 10 feet to the property line.
okay.
So I'm not sure if that's what answered your question. So it's roughly, if you look at, there's a dimension on this, I'm sorry, Roger, I apologize. I'm now looking at proposed site and geometry plan, sheet 4.
Okay,
There's a
thank you.
dimension, there's a dimension on there that shows from the emergency drive aisle to the property line is 20 feet. Because what these other dimensions don't take into account is the thickness of the wall.
That's what I'm trying to
Right.
figure out.
So it's 20 feet from the emergency road to the property line.
Okay,
And
And-
the 8 foot that's in question is only along the Paper Street Graham.
okay, so there's 20 feet between the emergency road and the property line, and within that 20 feet are all of these stacking retaining
The
walls?
2 walls, correct.
Okay.
And then only 1 wall on the other side of the building.
How tall is that wall, out of curiosity?
Which one?
The
Well,
one on the west side that's facing Fifth Avenue,
The lower one.
the lower one.
Keep asking me questions. I got you.
You don't, excuse me, you don't happen to have a drawing, do you, that shows the cut-through elevation? That would make, I think, understanding a lot simpler.
In the cross section?
Yeah, cross-section, yeah.
I do.
Okay.
One second. What was the question?
The question was the height of the wall on the lower, the Fifth Avenue. Yeah.
So it starts off in the front left corner where it makes the bend at 8 feet. So over in this area here, the wall's about 8 feet tall.
Could we ask you to use the microphone? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, in the northwest corner of the site, where before it makes the bend, it's approximately 8 foot tall. It eventually goes down to 0 here where it meets existing grade.
And the here is at the other end
I'm
of the
sorry,
building.
at the very southern portion of the
Correct.
building along Fifth. And in the center location, it varies between 5 and 6 feet. Located in the middle here, it's about 5 or 6 feet tall here, that wall there.
And is any additional fencing going up on these walls to prevent anyone from climbing on these walls, falling off these walls?
The answer is yes. Ron.
Yes.
They're required by OSHA.
Right.
Anything over 48 feet, 48 inches of height requires.
I'm sorry, requires, I didn't get the end of it.
40 foot railing, something to prevent somebody from inadvertently stepping on it.
I had a cross section. I must have forgot, I apologize. I did one specifically for the expert last meeting. I apologize. I
Hey,
must have
you know.
left it in the office.
I can picture it, but, you know, it's hard to.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought I had it.
But nonetheless, your testimony is that from the, I'll call it the emergency access to the property line is 20 feet?
20 feet, and if you don't count the width of the retaining walls, there's 17 feet,
Understood.
10 and 7.
And I guess the retaining walls, what, a foot and a half or something like?
Probably. Difference between 17 and 20 is 3 divided by 2,
Right.
foot and a half.
Okay,
Oh, I apologize, Ron.
there it
If
is.
I may, sheet, it's on, you did a revision 17 and 25, shows the rail retained.
Thank you, Bruce. I do have the cross-section, or cross-sections. So, Roger, these are not marked because obviously they were prepared just for tonight.
Okay, hold on. The last, I think that we only marked 2, at least in my notes, because all the others were part of the submission, so I think we're up to A3. On this date, right. And when you get to it, Ron, you can identify them, please.
Roger, if it's appropriate, I'm going to do
A3 Ford?
A4 and 5.
That's not a problem. And A3 is?
A3 is an aerial exhibit rendering of the site, which shows cross-section demarcations on it. So it shows a cross-section as if you're looking from South 7th, or cross-section as if you're looking from South 5th, a cross-section as if you look in the beginning of the site as you're coming down South 6th, and a cross-section if you're down at the end, the very southern end of the site, towards Graham Avenue or down towards the bottom of the project. So what I'm referring to now is A4. This contains what we refer to as the northern site section C and northern site section D. So Section C is if you're driving down South Sixth Avenue and you're looking at the site, this is what you're going to see when you're coming down South Sixth Avenue. The middle of the building represents that. As you look to your left, you see how the grade comes up, retaining walls, and then these are the existing grades and existing dwellings on South 7th. As you work your way to the right of the page, you can see that there's a single-story houses, predominantly single-story on South 5th, and you come down, you see the grade, and it drops down to where a building is. Similarly, section D, which is at the back of the site, is if you're standing on the walkway that we're proposing and you're looking back at the site, you see the full structure of the site. You see the parking level, you see the 4 stories of residential. To the left of the page, because you're facing the other direction, is the dwellings located on South 5th, and on the right of the page is the dwellings located on South 7th. So this gives you a kind of a cross-section of what's happening along.
Is that, do you have that reversed?
No, because.
No, he's right, right?
He's right,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, fine.
The other sheet I have, which is sheet A5, again dated today, is the 2 other cross-sections, the eastern site, section AA, and the western site, section BB. AA is if you're standing on South 7th looking at our site, you see the single-family houses that are located on 7th, and in the background you see our structure. And again, as we described earlier, because the property is in a V or in a ravine, even though it's a 4-story structure, you see by this cross-section, it doesn't dominate the height of the buildings that are existing on South 7th, as well as if you're standing on South 5th looking at the existing dwellings on South 5th and our building, again, in the background. The dashed line represents the topo beyond the houses. But again, this was something I think one of the board members came up, I believe it was Mr. Chin, might have mentioned something to me after the meeting about it would be helpful to have a cross-section, and we wanted to provide this to kind of give you a little bit more of a picture view, if you will, of what's transpiring out there. Because it's tough to look at the grading plan and understand exactly the extreme of the grade change. So even though you do have this multi-story structure in the middle of it, it's not a towering structure, as you will. I'm not sure, Mr. Miller, if that, I know you said you understand it, but that answers some of the questions on the cross-section and what's happening here.
I saw renderings of this building a number of years ago when you were before the planning board. I wasn't on the planning board, just came to the meeting as a resident. And I do remember in that rendering, because there was an issue brought by a number of residents that live on South 5th and South 7th. They were concerned about the height of the building towering over their properties and worrying about privacy issues and people being able to see into their backyards. And just kind of like having the buildings sort of match with their roof lines. These renderings, I'm not sure if this is what we saw in 2019, but this looks quite a bit higher than what I remember. And I'm just curious, did the height of the building change?
Not 1 inch.
Okay.
And just so you, this is collaboration, if you will, multiple revisions, mostly by Mr. Cosenza's office, of how to address your ordinance. And you're right, there was a lot of concern from both the residents and the borough on particularly the 4th floor, the upper floor,
Right.
what that was going to look like. And if you look at the ordinance that was created for the site, it was very particular on how to treat that upper level, so it didn't look like a true 4-story. So if you look on here, you see you have these gable windows, if you will, to break it up, as opposed to just having a 4th floor, which is a series of windows or balconies facing the residence. You have this roof line that's treated all the way around on all 4 sides. And again, that was part of the ordinance that was written. But I think it's 75 feet is the height. That hasn't changed since day one. We didn't lower the site. Matter of fact, I think if, maybe Bruce recalls, or maybe if Bruce wasn't involved yet, but there was a particular concentration, I know, by Mr. Cosenza's office about what's the existing elevation out there, and then it was calculated to there. So what the borough didn't want to do is just provide a 75-foot height and then allow us to fill the site in and then bring this monster building up. They were particular on where the starting elevation had to be so that this roof line was consistent with what's out there. So we kind of worked our ways backwards as to, okay, the existing grades, I'll make a number up, at 50, you can't go higher than 125 at the peak. No matter what you do at the site, you can't go past that number, and that's what we had to do to achieve this. So we didn't have this building that was towering over the existing residentials on both sides.
And complies with the ordinance as written.
Correct.
Okay. I think this is kind of where, just looking at the rendering, I know it's just a rendering, it's not exactly like the fullness of the woods that are behind that property. And I know that we spoke about earlier this evening, the need for cleanup and the removal of trees and all of those things and saving as many trees as possible. And I would encourage you to please try to save as many trees as possible, especially with regards to how close it is to the property lines, just on a visual aspect for the property owners both on South 7th and South 5th Avenue to have a bit of privacy on from their property as a buffer between their properties and yours.
Yeah, and again, we agree to attempt to try to save as many trees. What I do want to point out, just so the public and the board is understanding of, when you have a construction site and you're trying to save trees, sometimes trees can't be saved, even if you're not working immediately adjacent to it. You know, sometimes you damage the root ball, you could be working 15 feet away from a tree and damage something, and then you got to try to go in after the fact and take down a mature tree that died on you. So obviously, it's in our best interest, because of the slopes that are out there and the erosion, to save as many as we can.
So for any trees that you can't save, can you commit to replacing?
No, that's exactly what I said we can't do.
That's what we're going to try to do, to see what we can do in terms of actually trying to apply the literal meaning of the tree replacement ordinance. I don't know that that's going to apply, given the circumstances, but I do think that there can be an attempt to try to save as many trees, number one. And number two, they have a landscaping plan. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask was the fact that, Ron, I think you had indicated that I think it's on the South 7th side, where you have the tiered wall. I thought that you indicated either today or in the last testimony that there was going to be some landscaping in between those areas. That you said that there was a 6-foot separation between the first and the second wall.
Yeah, so again, I'm referring back to the landscape plan that I spoke about earlier. You can see the heavy vegetation, which is bushes, trees, shrubs, at the upper location between the upper wall, that 10 feet, so to speak. And then we have low-growing vegetation, ground cover, and everything in the lower area, between the plateau, if you will, between the walls. And that's consistent on both sides of the property, where we have the landscaping pushed up again. And again, this is not taking into account whatever trees may be saved.
And so there will be an attempt, and the landscaping plan includes the fact that on the upper portion of that tiered wall, there will be landscaping, which will include not only the shrubberies, which is low-lying, but also some trees that will be breaking up the view from the people that are on South 7th.
Yeah, there's both deciduous and shade trees. There's a multiple mix of evergreens and everything up there, so you have full year protection. But it's a mixture. I know that Mr. Koch's office and Ms. Kinn's office were particular on what we put in there, so you have that privacy. You have the low-growing stuff, you have the medium stuff, and you have the higher stuff to help.
And then just to complete the thought, on the South 5th Street side, is there also a landscape buffer along there on the top edge?
There is.
And is that similar?
Very similar.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other members of the board? Okay, then. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. This is a, I hope, relatively quick question. So I believe in looking through all of this, and I can't find the pages in front of me, but there's stuff in there about utility infrastructure, that kind of thing, and I think there's gas infrastructure that's proposed in there. Is that correct? I'm pretty sure I saw that, right?
We're proposing gas to our building.
Yeah, right. That's
Correct.
what I'm saying. So I just want to bring up the issue that there is legislation proposed in New Jersey right now. I don't know its prospects for passage. I don't know where it's going. But is legislation proposed, as written right now, would outlaw new gas hookups for, I believe it's just kitchen appliances right now, but it's likely to be kind of rolled forward from there as of 2026. And I mean, just the reality of the world is that, like, gas stuff is just not going to be sustainable 10, 15 years down the road, and we're going to have to retrofit everything anyway. It's cheaper to build without gas infrastructure because it's just one fewer set of things you have to install when you do it. So I want to just ask you if all electric construction is something you do, and if that's something you would be comfortable doing on this site, recognizing that ultimately it is going to happen, whether it's at original construction, 10-year, 15-year down the road retrofit, it's going to happen, and it's just cheaper to do it up front.
Yeah, it's not something we currently do.
Okay.
We're familiar with the legislation, but it's not something
Yeah, I'm
we
sure you're
currently
keeping
do.
an eye on it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just follow up with that? So I heard you're not prepared to do all electric.
Correct.
Units. Our master plan calls out sustainability. We've had planning efforts to decarbonize and to reduce greenhouse gases. And if you went all electric, that would be consistent with our master plan, and it would be healthier for the residents. I mean, having natural gas stoves, it poisons residents. It poisons people. So, and the market is moving towards where that's going to be a desirable amenity, and you could get ahead of that trend and actually market these units with induction, having induction stoves, much better quality, probably can get a premium on the rent too. I'd ask you to really consider that, and I think to do so would be really consistent with our master plan and state plans and state and federal initiatives.
Understanding that, not going to debate good, bad, or indifferent, different types of appliances. This is something that even Mr. Wolfson indicated. We're not sure when to shovel in the ground here. We're aware of things that are changing. If you would ask me 5 years ago if I would have put electric charging stations in my apartment complexes, I would have said no. We're doing it now. We're going back and retrofitting it. So, we try to maintain what the customer wants, whether it's a for sale product or a rental product. I'm not prepared to stand here today and say that we would commit to do that, but obviously a year from now, 2 years from now, who knows where the world is, where we're going to be. And to your point, if it's in our best interest to do it, it's an option we would look at, but I'm not prepared to stand here today and say we would or wouldn't commit to that.
Given the fact, Jeff, that this project has a number of hoops to go through before it gets completed, and again, no one really knows where this legislation's going, but the point is, if you look at it, and if in fact it's true, in 2 years, there may very well be a statute that says they're going to do it anyway. But you can't really predict that at this point in time.
And there's nothing we can do to have in a condition of approval if 2 or 3 years down the line that they would some sort of trigger. I don't mean legal, but like if there's some sort of trigger, something the board can at least be noticed on. Oh, okay, maybe they can do all electric.
Well, I think what you heard is the applicant indicating that they're going to end up doing what the market dictates. Two things. What that means is that if there's legislation before they start building, which is potentially the possibility, I mean, it's very possible that they're not going to be in the ground for another 2 years. The legislation may already be in effect, and they don't have a choice. The other aspect of it is in 2 years, there may very well be a burning desire on the part of their marketing department to actually put in electric rather than gas. So, but I understand your point, and the answer, in my opinion, is no. It is part of the master plan, but it's not part of the ordinance to require them to do that.
I would just note that in your statement that if asked a few years ago, you wouldn't put electric chargers and you wouldn't have put this many in unless the state law told you to do. You're always a little bit behind what the right thing to do is. So, I mean, I'm just saying.
Roger, I have a question. So if we approve tonight and it's all approved, and then 2 years from now they say you have to have electric stoves, that will supersede our approval? Because right now we're approving gas.
Well, you're approving
project.
the development, and if it turns out that in 2 years they start to develop it, and there's a new statute in place that says they're going to have electric, they're going to be bound by that. Now,
Would they also
who knows
be-
what the timing is going to be, but
Would they also be bound if it was a local ordinance as opposed to a state ordinance?
I'd have to look into that a little bit more, because the approval may be a little different. But certainly with regard to the state statute, especially if they haven't put anything into the ground, they would certainly be subject to that.
Just for the record, I don't necessarily agree with that statement.
Well,
But
that's
if-
my opinion,
if-
and that's why we're
Maybe-
lawyers, because we
maybe
generally
right.
disagree.
But if there is a statute that is applicable to us, we will.
Oh, I'm sorry, my
we will
fault.
comply
Thank you.
with it. If there is a statute that is applicable to us, we will comply with
Well,
it.
that's what I thought I said, and God forbid I agree with you too much, but
The approval is good for how many years?
Forever.
well, essentially, it's an approval that gives them protection for a period of time, for preliminary and final. And if the ordinance doesn't change, then they're protected, as Mr. Wolfson said, forever. If there's a change in the ordinance, but the borough has to then take into account that concern in terms of changing the ordinance, because it is an affordable housing. There's another level that is just, that supersedes the municipal land use law. So it is going to be a situation where it's going to be difficult to change the ordinance because of that fact.
And I also just wanted to comment for the record that we don't agree with the statement that you're approving gas. You're approving you're approving, somebody said that.
I know.
We're approving a project.
Right.
And whether we go gas or electric is entirely up to our decisions with the local utilities.
Yes, so a few questions. I'm the new boy on the block, and perhaps the questions I ask are stupid. So, at this point, this project is compliant with all the setback requirements.
Except the one that was created by the
No,
fire marshal.
that's my question. Is it not compliant with the setback requirements, or is it only non-compliant with the landscape buffer requirements?
I mean, the variance request, to be specific, is an existing and/or planted buffer should be provided along the exterior track line having a minimum width of 20 feet. Applicant proposes a planted buffer along the entirety of the tract. However, the planted materials are generally limited to approximately 8 feet in width, requiring a variance.
Right, so if that's true, that's what I'm asking you. You're not requesting a setback, a variance from the setback requirements. The setback is 40 feet from the property line.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what your plan says. I'm reading off your plan.
Yes.
And you're going to be more than that, so you're not requesting a variance from that.
Correct.
You're only requesting a variance for the landscaping that has to be put within that setback. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Your plan shows, all your plans shows this wiggly set of paths on the south side of the building. Are those actual paths, or are those merely conceptual?
Well, actual meaning they're not
Mike.
built. They're designed to be built.
Mike?
Actual meaning they're not built, they're proposed to be built, and they're designed to be built. The reason that they have the meandering is to comply with ADA.
Okay, and so do they connect to anything?
They do not.
Okay, so you couldn't use that path to get to the playground at the 3rd Street entrance to Johnson Park.
That's correct.
So, if you were, well, imagine yourself a parent with a 3-year-old in a stroller. How would you get from this building to any playground with equipment suitable for a 3-year-old? Maybe Ms. Cafone is the right person to answer that.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know if we need the planner to talk about, if somebody in a stroller has to go to Donaldson Park or Johnson Park, any place other than our site, they'd have to go out and work the road network by going out to Mansfield, down to 7th or 5th, and walking down towards the park.
Okay.
You know,
No different than it is now.
Yeah, but there's no building there now.
They gotta get to the park.
Yes, but my concern is, and I think it's great that you're proposing 3 and 4 bedroom units, that there'll be opportunities for families, but I'm very concerned that this building turns out to be nominally desirable for families, but in practice hostile, because there aren't actually the amenities that you need for families. So I'm happy to hear that you're proposing on-site recreation for children, because I think that is, from my point of view, that's what makes this not a family hostile project.
Appreciate that.
Khalidra?
Sort of piggybacking on the issue that he brings up, which I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. So just kind of piggybacking on that, because he does raise a really good point about access to the park, giving the building's proximity to Donaldson Park geographically. But is there a thought, perhaps, that one pathway that you have towards the south of the building, there are pathways, like there's presently a walking path to the park at the end of what is Donaldson Street on South 7th Avenue, and then it connects to Valentine Street when you're on 5th Avenue. Is there any desire or any thought maybe of connecting your path to that, to make it walkable from your
On
building?
property that we don't own?
Well, so, no, I understand that you don't own that property, but in working with the borough to make a connection where your property stops and the borough property begins.
The borough is free to do it. I mean, nothing stops you from putting a path in.
Okay,
We have no way to touch that property, nor would we ever want to, for liability purposes, but the borough certainly could do it.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to just
Go ahead,
jumping
Jeff.
off Kalitra's point. I mean, it talks about it gets back to my early point about off-track improvements. And again, you are putting a sidewalk off your site on South Sixth Avenue, and then it looks like you're restriping the intersection. So you are making pedestrian connections off your site. And so the question about making pedestrian, that's on the north side, and making pedestrian connections to the south side, again, it's a fair question. You know, you have a pedestrian dead end right now, and whether you actually work with the borough to install sidewalks or to extend the connection, or to provide the borough some funds so that they could do it. That's a reasonable off-track improvement.
Well,
It talks about pedestrian
Respectfully, we
circulation.
disagree. It's not a reasonable off-track improvement. It's a cost-generating improvement on property we don't own, the need for which is not caused by our development. Is it a convenience and something that's nice for the borough? Yes.
I disagree with the need not caused by your development, because your development is bringing families to that area, and that.
And their family's already there.
Correct.
So it's not fair to
No,
impose the entire cost on the last one in.
I'm not suggesting that, but what I'm saying is, there isn't presently a building there, and it has been a point of contention, and this is not your fault. There has been a point of contention of the lack of access to the park by way of walkways. Some of that has been addressed with a pathway that exists between South 7th Avenue and South 5th Avenue, but because you're placing a building right in the middle of those two streets on South 6th Avenue, and that building is going to be filled with wonderful families and their children, and they're going to want to have access to the park, I think it would look more as a gesture of good faith to work with the borough to connect this pathway to a dead end to the pathway that currently exists, and working with the borough. And I don't know if that's you guys give funds or we give funds or we match funds, some way that we can work together to create a pathway for the residents of your building.
The answer to that question is, once this project is approved, if you want to approach our people and ask for contributions or donations, feel free. Our owner is incredibly generous. He's built senior citizen buildings. He's built Make-A-Wish Foundation. He's dedicated acres and acres of land, millions of dollars in charity. But it can't be part of the approval process.
Just a point of clarity, I'm looking at the prints. You do bring a sidewalk to the edge of your property on the south side, correct? I mean,
Yeah,
that's...
the ordinance requires it.
Yeah.
And it's on our
so
property.
and I don't know whether that corridor leading down is open space. I mean, it seems like, so if any connection wanted to be made, your connection is there. So I don't know.
Yeah,
if
we've
it's
set that up.
convenient. I mean,
You're right. We've
so
set
I'm just
that up,
looking at
so-
the plans, and I see you do bring a sidewalk to the edge of your property in one location. On the print, it's kind of in the bottom right-hand corner, if you would continue the Graham Street, what is it called, Baker Street or whatever. So it's there on your print, so it'll be there if need to tie into. Is that a correct assessment?
I agree with
of
that.
How I'm reading it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, just being mindful of the time, and I promise if members of the board have more comments, we'll come back, but I would like to open this up to public comments so members of the public could be heard on this application. So, that being said, if there are any members of the public who wish to be heard, I'm going to ask you to come up to the microphone, or we can have a microphone brought to you. When you are heard, please say your name, your address, and spell your last name.
And again, we're going to need, I understand, just so that's clear, we're going to need to end up having people sworn in, just as we've done for the applicant. So it's not a painful process, but it is something that's necessary because you are giving testimony. You may be thinking it's nothing more than comments, but it is in the nature of testimony. So with that, do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Would you be kind enough to state your name, spell your last name, and your address?
Diane Feldman, F as in Frank, ELDMAN. My address is 409 North 4th Avenue.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks. I'm here about accessible parking on the spot. I know that I had submitted comments from the Commission for Universal Access years ago when this application first came out, and I was concerned about the placement of the accessible spaces, and I'm just wondering if maybe you can review where they are.
Excuse me for interrupting, Ron. I think this question may have. Oh, okay. All right.
Where they are, how many they are, and how close they are to elevators, specifically in the underground parking.
Thank you.
Because I understand there is some also by the front door, so.
Yes, thank you. I'm referring to a drawing called Proposed Underground Parking Plan. It is sheet 5 of 25, dated, latest revision date of 3/24/23. Ms. Feldman, you're right, there are two spaces, ADA spaces located outside. Those are for, primarily for visitors, prospective tenants, visitors that come to the site that need to go inside the office. There are, not one bit. There are accessible spaces located in the parking structure. They're immediately adjacent to the elevator. So you have these spaces located here. The EV spaces are located over here, but we have ADA spaces all along here that are located immediately adjacent to the elevator.
How many elevators go down to the basement? Only one or two?
Two.
And you're telling me that all of the accessible spaces are located next to one elevator?
That's correct.
That is not. Accessible spaces should be distributed across the accessible entrances. So one elevator would classify as one entrance, another elevator would classify as another entrance, and the front door would classify as another. So you should really have them two spaces at each of these, and out of the 6, there should be one van accessible space.
To your point, we have no issue with relocating 2 of the spaces over to the other elevator. I will point out that there is several 8-foot spaces. There also is an 11-foot van space on the eastern side of the building that'll probably stay there. The other 2 spaces will be relocated over by the other elevator, as well as the spaces that are outside.
We're okay with her request? Yes. Mr. Thomas, if the board thought that that was an appropriate condition to impose on an approval, we're happy to do it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Just one more thing for this application in future. You're calling them ADA spaces. They're accessible spaces. New Jersey has changed their terminology. They're not handicap spaces. They're accessible parking spaces. So
I think they agreed at the last hearing to do that. I thought I had heard that, but nonetheless, I think your point was made the last time, and I think that they had agreed.
My point last time was about the redevelopment.
Oh,
plan.
that's right, it was some,
It was
you're absolutely right.
redevelopment.
You didn't make it as far as this application, sorry.
No, oh,
Yeah,
it's just, it's a learning experience for all of us, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who wish to be heard?
Sir, do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Would you be kind enough to state your name, spell your last name, and give us your address?
James Lapidus, Lapidus, 420 South 7th Avenue.
Sure, go ahead.
So we heard a lot about all the questions facing this development today. We talked about the planted buffer and the stormwater, but what we didn't hear was any mention about the effect on traffic, parking overflow, and stormwater in the event of an exceptional rainfall, which seems to happen almost at least once a year at this point. I know that I brought these concerns up last time I was here several years ago, and I was very concerned then, and I'm even more concerned now. The proposed building is not off any major roads such as River Road or Cedar Lane like the other new developments going on in town. It's tucked away 3 blocks down South 6th Avenue in the heart of the South Side. When you consider that South 6 is a narrow one-way street, all the traffic's going to go down South 5th. And we are also considering that there's going to be a large development in the Stop and Shop on the corner of 5th. So we have the makings of an extremely unpleasant traffic situation and congestion going on. When you also consider that in that neighborhood, there's Bartle School, there's the municipal building and the teen center. You also have the potential for unsafe pedestrian crossings for our children. Now, at the time, I know this is a long shot, I gotta say it though. To me, the proposed 75-unit building is just too big for this tract of land. It's gonna have a negative impact on the neighborhood around it and just does not make sense for Highland Park as a whole. These questions facing Highland Park would seem to be mitigated if they would just simply scale down this project. A modest development of, say, 35 to 40 high-quality luxury units, condos, townhomes, whatever, 2.5 stories tall with the appropriate amount of affordable housing would mitigate these concerns. And in turn, perhaps the township could give the developer more freedom in designing this development. No construction has commenced yet. I don't see any reason why this cannot be reconsidered at this point. I'd just also like to bring up the tree removal issue. And I just am asking that the developer, if there's any way the developer could work with the residents of South 7th and South 5th on removing the trees, because I know people love trees and they have an emotional connection to them. But at least on the South 7th side, there's many overgrown trees which are sick and dying and have concrete and metal debris growing in them. And I would feel safer if they were removed instead of left there just for sentimental reasons. So I wasn't exactly quite clear on what the tree removal thing is, if they're going to leave the large trees or if they're going to all be taken away. But I'm just hoping that it would be more of a case-by-case basis for each individual tree. And I just would also hope that when we were talking about the stormwater, I wasn't quite clear on the technical terms, but is there any thought to there being a study during an exceptional rainstorm? I know that's all a matter of timing, that it can't be predicted, but has there been any thought to observing the effects of stormwater after an exceptional storm?
Anything further? Thank you, sir.
I'm not sure what response you would prefer. I don't know whether or not it's your practice to explain to the public or the board that the traffic conditions for permitted use are not a legitimate consideration by the board, based on the zoning and the permitted nature of the use, and that the fact that the size and location of the building is one that's a result of negotiation and compromise and agreement, mostly with the design of the town. So that's not going to change, and the traffic is not a legitimate consideration. People will be careful, will be careful. And with regard to the tree removal, to the extent that that was confusing, the issue from our perspective, as I think I tried to explain to the board, is the property is contaminated. It's got all kinds of stuff that's, probably carcinogenic, that we're trying to either cap if we lose our suit or clean out if we win our suit. To clean that out, you got to get rid of the trees. And our position with the borough and with the planning board is the tree removal ordinance can't stop us or charge us to replace trees that we have to remove because the borough polluted our property. That's our position, and I think the planning board has understood what that situation is and asked us to work with the borough's professionals in order to save as many trees as possible, which is a fair ask to the extent, and we wanted to, for reasons that Mr. Allenbeck indicated, where there's trees on the slope that helps us. It prevents or it retards erosion and things like that. So we want to save the trees. It's in our interest to do it. Makes it for a better site, makes for better engineering, and we will work with them to try to save as many as possible. But I don't want there to be any illusion that there's not going to be a lot of trees removed.
What I'm asking is, will sick and overgrown trees be removed?
The discussion now is we're going to remove trees that need to be removed because of the cleanup. If there are other trees that are sick or dying, as a safety measure, I'm guessing the borough would want us to take them down so they don't fall and hurt somebody. And we would.
And I also just want to comment too that the 75 units that are in the multifamily zoning ordinance that's in place now, that number was the result of a multi-year litigation with the applicant. It's not something that council just considered and came out with. It came through court litigation. So the hands are tied as far as the number of units allowed to be built on the site. And Matt, go ahead.
Could I just, I just want to make it clear, we don't know if they're carcinogenic at this point, right? Is that
Well, some of the
fair?
heavy metals and things they found.
But
are-
but the fact is that we don't know, right? And
Well,
part of the whole process is that we are going to be discovering that.
We
as
don't know
move
how
forward.
much is there.
Fair enough.
But the things that we have found, some of them are on that list.
Well, I think that the point that Mr. Hale's making is that's part of the litigation that we're not going to get involved in. So
Fair.
I think that
Fair.
we don't need to really get into what's there, what's not there. There's an agreement that there is contamination, and ultimately that'll be resolved, as we've said, in the litigation, and that's why we're not commenting upon it. And I would prefer
Fair
that
point.
you, Mr. Wolfson, not comment any further either. Thank you.
I'll also add one more point to one of the questions you raised about Bruce's comments about the stormwater management plan and the applicant's management plan, which is they're going to be testing, and that includes waiting for a real rainy season to monitor what's going on.
That would be with respect to the sanitary sewer, but the storm sewer calculations we talked about, we're going to be looking at the upstream drainage area, evaluating the flows, determining if the downstream pipe can handle that, and sure that they want to have an emergency bypass path for an unusual storm so it doesn't come into the parking deck or the lobby and instead goes around the building.
So all of which to say is it is a major concern of this development, what happens to the stormwater. Okay. Any other members of the public?
Hi, do you swear, excuse me just one second, do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give
Sure.
will be the truth, so help you God? If you'd be
Yes,
kind
yes.
enough to state your name, spell your last name, and your,
Lois-
oh, excuse me, your address, sorry.
Lebbing, L-E-B-B-I-N-G, North Second Avenue, Highland Park, too many years. I arrived late. I didn't hear what the height of the parking garage entrance will be.
I don't think it was mentioned today, but I don't, but I'm sure we'll have that.
Of the entrance.
It'll be the code.
11 feet. It's the entrance at 11.
11 feet, wonderful. Good. Okay, and then I think this board approved Pulte 2 off River Road years ago. Wayside going in before the tunnel off River Road is very steep. I'm sure the developer said, oh, it'll be the same width as North Second, which is a little more level, really a lot more level until you get to the avenue. Wayside is very steep, parking on both sides. I have a clutch. I've been using it for many years, but when there's traffic coming down and snow on the side, we didn't have that this year, it's very narrow even when there's no one else coming down but cars parked on both sides. So I don't know what the width, I know it was just mentioned now, the width should be a little, if it's sloped, if this is going to be sloped at all, the entrance coming in, it needs to have some sort of width or level area, because that example from this board is awful, and I invite you to try it, especially with a clutch. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to be heard? All right, seeing none, I will close the public comment portion, and I will turn back again to our board members if there was anyone else who wanted to have any further questions or comments. Last call.
This is a kind of a point of order here. I know people that are not here were intending to be able to watch this live, but I don't know if it's intended to be streamed on YouTube, but it is currently not being, and if we could...
Oh,
I don't know.
Ask our technical support.
There's something going on with that right now?
Okay, yeah,
There is a recording going on. It will be on YouTube?
gotcha, thank you.
It was definitely the intention. I think,
Okay.
Mr. Wilson, do you have anything further?
No, that's our case, Mr. Thomas, Madam Chair. I believe that we have demonstrated our entitlement to an approval of this long-awaited project for us. I think that we have demonstrated a willingness to work with your staff in order to ameliorate, mitigate, or eliminate the concerns that they've raised. I think we've answered all the questions that anybody should had or should have in conjunction with the project. It is essentially a conforming application in strict accordance with the rules and the regulations and the ordinance requirements, including the architectural and the facades. I mean, it's really, personal privilege, it's a pretty spectacular looking building, and I think that as much as I don't want to be blowing smoke, the fact of the matter is most of the design is attributable to the input from Mr. Cosenza and Mr. Koch, which I want to thank, because without that, it certainly wouldn't look, in my view, as nice as it looks today. And because of the slopes of the property, it's not going to be, you know, a very tall little building. You saw the, you know, the pictures. It's barely visible from as a distinction between the houses that are on those streets and not. Doing an extraordinary amount of landscaping in order to try to beautify and screen the property, and we are providing a much-needed source of family housing, both affordable and market rate, in an area which I think certainly could use it. I like this town. I grew up in this town. I would not consciously do anything to hurt this town. So for whatever that's worth, I think the applicant has put his case in. We would hope and request that the board act favorably upon it, and certainly we're agreeable to the conditions that we put on the record as to our assent, as well as our willingness and ability to work with what I think are your very fine professionals in coming up with the solutions to hopefully no problems, but we'll see that as it may.
Thank you. So we've had a lot of caveats and a lot of comments that were added to the caveats throughout the course of tonight. So, Roger, if someone were inclined to make a motion to approve this, what would this look like?
The motion would include a series of conditions, and those conditions, in my opinion, should include the following. Those items that are contained in Mr. Koch's report, subject to the testimony that was received at the April 13th, 2023 meeting, all of which I have notes, and in particular, there would be modifications with regard to item number 15, which deals with the sanitary sewer, with the understanding that the applicant has agreed to provide for a study that will include flow flow meters to study the flow, and that information will then be calculated in a manner that's acceptable to your borough engineer, and that it will then end up making a determination as to whether or not the sanitary flow with the addition of this project will be sufficient. If it is, that ends that condition, and if it's not, it will then be the obligation as part of a developer's agreement that in fact there will be an attempt by the parties to ameliorate the problem amicably, and if not, it will go back to the court. The same is true with regard to the flow for stormwater. That's condition number 31. The same process will occur. The applicant will undertake the study that will be reviewed by your borough engineer. It will either establish that there is no problem, or if there is, the parties will attempt to agree to resolve it amicably, and if not, it will go back to the court. Excuse me. There were also issues that were raised at today's meeting, and they include the item number 7.9, and that is the dealing with the tree removal. And in light of all of the litigation, unfortunately, which hangs over everybody's head, there is a determination that has been made that the property does have contamination, and that there was litigation with regard to tree removal, and that therefore the tree removal ordinance per se does not apply, but it is going to be a condition that the applicant will attempt to try to preserve as many trees on the site as possible and work with your consultants to accomplish that goal. Also, the applicant is going to be required to ultimately provide a report to determine that the site is clean and is acceptable for human habitation, and that report will be submitted to the LSRP, ultimately presumably approved by the DEP, and that report that is submitted to the LSRP will be submitted to the Environmental Commission for their review. The applicant has also agreed, to provide a tot lot on site, the dimensions of which will be provided in cooperation with the borough engineer and the borough planner. Also, there has been an agreement that they will in fact relocate the accessible parking stalls that are currently located mostly at one elevator, that they will be separated so that they will be distributed appropriately to both elevators, and that the terminology for those spaces will no longer be considered handicap spaces, but rather accessible spaces. I believe that those are the issues that I had come up with during the course of today's discussion and hearing, and I believe...
Just to pile on, I also had that any generators would have hospital-grade enclosures as
Okay.
part of the LRK condition 7.15, and not to, if you said this, I apologize, but that the conditions in the LRK letter of April 5th, 2023 also apply except for 7.9.
Right.
Right, oh.
I thought I included both, but I could have not.
We have the hospital-grade
Right.
elevator, and it's a critical-grade silencer, which is the bunker.
Critical-grade silencer.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
the motion should also address the C2 variance?
Yes. The C2 variance would be granted on the basis that the applicant has provided sufficient information either by way of a C1 standard in terms of the configuration of the lot and the constraints of the lot, as they have testified to through their planner, and/or through the C2 criteria based upon the fact that they are providing a benefit under subsection A, which is health, safety, and welfare, by providing a variety of housing, which is also, I believe, section G, as well as section I, which is an advancement of a development that is aesthetic. Well, I don't want to use the term aesthetic, but has a positive visual impact. With regard to the negative impact, the applicant has established through its planner and the testimony and the exhibits that in fact there has been sufficient testimony that there's no substantial detriment to the surrounding properties with regard to the variance based upon the testimony that has been given, and it's really in terms of the additional landscaping that they are providing, notwithstanding that they have a deviation from a certain spot, and that there's no substantial detriment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan or the zoning ordinance, on the basis that they are fulfilling part of the master plan of the borough, which is to provide for affordable housing, which is a statewide mandate. And I think for all of those reasons, the board can approve the variance requested. Thank you for reminding me of that.
All right, with all those conditions laid out, are there any members of the board who'd like to make the motion as outlined by Mr. Thomas?
Madam Chair, in point of order, is everyone eligible to vote?
Very good point. I think, well, is anybody, let's put it this way, is anybody not eligible, then, meaning, were you not here at the last meeting?
We had,
I think I've...
everyone was here at the last meeting.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure that, unless I'm wrong, we're all good. Okay, the answer is yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Then so moved.
Second.
All right, we'll take a roll call vote.
Mr. Brusher?
Yes.
Mr. Chin?
Yes.
Ms. Hadhazi?
Yes.
Mr. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Lenard?
Yes.
Mr. Malay?
Before I vote yes, I'd just like to say that a lot of people will be upset about what happened and the way it happened and other issues, but I'd just like to say that the problem isn't with perhaps the developer or the borough, but it lies in the fact that we have this thing called builder's remedy. And I think builders should build and government should figure out how and where to put affordable housing. But I vote yes.
Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Mr. Stern Cardinal?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Hand?
Yes.
Mr. Eisdorfer?
Yes.
Motion approved. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen from the public.
All right. I know that was the bulk of our very exciting part of our evening,
The ones you marked tonight should leave, the other ones you can take, feel free to take.
but we're not actually done for the evening, so board
Doug,
members, I'm
Doug,
gonna
we do
keep
need-
your
We have other
attention.
business, so if you don't mind.
Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm sure we'll be arguing over language.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
Ms. Gaffone? Ms. Gaffone? Yeah, if you just want to come
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, our next order of business is approval, or at least review, of a resolution P2023-01, which is a review of our resolution at our April 13th, 2023 meeting. We have a draft in front of us, and I will open the discussion to the board for comments on the draft, if anyone has any comments or changes to the resolution before we review it. No? Anyone?
I have one
Matt,
question.
go ahead.
So the second clause after the be it resolved,
This is on page 3?
page 3.
Yep.
So the governing body that if a destination grocery store such as Whole Foods or Trader Joe's is to be an occupant of the site, that the borough planner be authorized to look at parking requirements in light of that situation? I just want to make sure I understand that.
Yeah, what transpired is that there was a discussion that took place at the last meeting on the lots that, hold on, sorry. There was a discussion that took place at the last meeting with regard to this proposal, and there came, before the board, some of the board members expressed concern with regard to the fact that as part of this application, there was a requirement, and understandably so, that there be, as part of any of the options, I think there were 3 scenarios, that each of the 3 scenarios would include a grocery store. Some of the board members were concerned that if you ended up, if whoever the developer was, ended up having what was considered to be, my term, I don't know if it's a term of art, but my term, a destination store, like a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's as example, that could then have an impact potentially on parking. Now, what the board ultimately did, as I think I tried to give in the final determination, is that the board does hereby find that pursuant to the section, that it is not inconsistent with the master plan of the Borough of Highland Park. So that's the ultimate decision. However, it went on to indicate Further, it makes suggestions to the governing body with regard to the following. And those are some of the suggestions. And it was based upon that. So it was really a situation where it is not the intent and purpose to say, guys, you screwed up and do it all over again. It is rather, this is you asked for our opinion. Here's what we thought you might want to think about in the event that this kind of stuff occurs. And that's what numbers 1 and 2 had to do with, and that's why they were put there as suggestions.
Mike, so Whole Foods and Trader Joe's are just examples of what a potential destination store
Yes.
could be. So
Yes.
it could be.
Could be, I mean, I
Could be
Pomegranate or
Wegmans.
something else,
Costco,
right?
Wegmans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Wegmans would go here to this kind of a space, nor would a Costco, which I consider a destination store personally. But, you know, it's the example, not specifically those items or those facilities.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure of that.
Any
So
other-
I have, as I indicated in my colloquy with the planner at the last meeting, I have considerable problems with this redevelopment plan. And my problems are that at this stage in the process, it's way too detailed. That at best it's spinning our wheels, and at worst it's actually counterproductive because we are prescribing things before we've entered into any negotiation with a developer. So I'm troubled by this. You know, we have a dual mandate by law. We are to determine whether it's inconsistent with the master plan, and I don't have any quarrel with the fact that it's not inconsistent. We also have a mandate to make recommendations. And my recommendation would be that to delete Section 6 of the redevelopment plan, which is all the standards, and to delete the paragraph 2 of the suggestions. Another, making it more specific ahead of any negotiations. I think this is a very hard project. I think we need to have open minds. I think the market is going to determine almost everything, and I think it is premature for us to have 10 pages of specifications in law, because that's what the standards will be, prior to beginning any negotiations.
You did express that that concern, Steve, and I understood it. I think I'll leave it to the board as to whether or not they want to amend the action that was taken. As you know, this is a memorialization of the action.
We didn't take a vote.
No, that's true. We did not.
We did not. This
Yeah.
is the action we're
You're
taking.
right.
This is not memorialization.
What I would, well, it's really up to the board.
I could
question-
express my opinion as
Go ahead.
something that I believe slightly different, that I believe it's good to be upfront, to save time and effort and attract those builders that are interested and qualified to build a supermarket. And then and if, for whatever reason, there is a problem, then you could perhaps go back to the drawing board. But the people in Highland Park need a supermarket. They don't need a redevelopment simply without one. So I think this is we're taking a gamble, yeah, but I think it's in the best interest of Highland Park to do so. So that would be my opinion.
I guess if there's any other comments.
Yes.
Alan?
I believe Mr. Hale indicated on,
Microphone, and there you go.
I believe Mr. Hale indicated that what was proposed for the municipal parking lot by the Reformed Church, that the developer came in and says, I have some other ideas that are even better. And the borough was open to that. So I think this is not, I think developers will speak up if they have a better idea. So I leave it as it is.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, does anyone want to make a motion on the proposed resolution?
Motion to adopt?
Second.
All right, we'll take a roll call vote to adopt as is.
Mr. Brusher? Yes. Mr. Chin?
Yes.
Ms. Hadhazi?
Yes.
Mr. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Lenari?
Yes.
Mr. Malay?
Yes.
Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Mr. Stern Cardinal?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Hand?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
No.
The motion passes.
All right. All right, I know it says correspondence and reports next, but I'm going to go down to action on any other items. It was referred to us from Borough Council, and I do apologize, I should have addressed this last time, but it just didn't make it on the agenda, that we have, the council would like us to authorize a study of additional blocks and lots through our planner, Looney Ricks Kiss, to determine if those areas are also areas in needed redevelopment without condemnation powers. The council's resolution has already authorized payment of the study and selection of LRK as the planner to do so, but they are our planner, so it is
Right.
coming to us for,
And it is your study, by the way.
and it's our study as the planning board to do the study,
With all
even
due
though
respect to the governing
council
body.
has agreed to pay for it and use LRK to do the study.
Has this resolution been distributed to the board?
I don't know. Have we distributed? All
Okay,
right.
so everybody should have it.
It would have been emailed to you before the last meeting, and it might have been lost in the deluge of items that were emailed around. So does anyone know if they've had a chance to look at the town resolution? Well, it complicates things. Okay.
Where is this?
So the town, oh, sorry, it's all right. Borough Council sent us a resolution.
No, I mean,
oh.
what, I've got the block,
Where's
block and
the-
lots. Where is it?
Where are they?
Oh, Matt?
I don't know the block and lot numbers. They are along.
No, we have.
No, he should have that.
It's the optometrist on the corner and the affordable housing building owned by Reformed Church of Highland Park right next to it. It's the on Magnolia Street. It's the home directly to the right when you're looking at the driveway to the farmer's market. It's the one with the nice fig tree, just right on the sidewalk. And the third group of lots. Well, excuse me. There's an additional lot that's lot 13, which is the a very long lot that has street frontage on South 3rd and has a blue banner on the porch advertising childcare. So if you've seen that, that's the lot, and it goes all the way
back.
So that it becomes adjacent to Tract C, an existing redevelopment area. And then there's the 3 lots, 38, 39, and 37. That's the Kitty Cafe and Taxi Office and Speak Music Conservatory, and I believe a vacant storefront. And those front South 3rd and Route 27. They're all on the corner there.
So what,
Thank you very much for that.
What makes us think that these are areas that are blighted or in need of redevelopment?
We don't know. That's why
That's
we're
why
being
we-
asked to do a study.
That's why we do the
the
study.
question is, well, as a threshold question, why is this even being considered?
Because council referred it to us for consideration.
I think there's a fundamental question that is being asked. Why did council refer it?
Yeah.
What was the basis for the council's decision?
You know, I listened to those lots, and none of them strike me as being obvious candidates to be deemed blighted, obvious candidates for being in need of redevelopment. I don't know. There's lots of things I don't know. Maybe there are folks who know things more that suggest that as a threshold matter, that this is something we ought to entertain. And that's the question we're being asked. You know, should we entertain it?
Well,
So-
Okay. I'm going to let Matt answer that as our council representative. For my viewpoint, council has asked us to do the study precisely for the reasons you've said, why they selected these lots to have the study done. I'll let Matt let us know.
So I'm not a planner, but I'll give it a shot. So the one of the thresholds for this designation is that it is in proximity to other areas. So it's not just that it is blighted. It's not just that it is an area in need of redevelopment. It's that it is in proximity to another entity that has already been designated that would make the project improve, that would make the project better. So one of the thresholds that could be reached or might be reached is a very minimal one, is that it's in close proximity to others. And I'll give you an example. On the Stop and Shop lot, the building on the corner of 5th and Raritan was included in that, even though it is not a blighted building, even though it is a building that we would like to keep, but it was included because it's in the same proximity. So part of the rationale for doing this is that there is the potential that with these additional properties and with these additional added into this, that the overall project might be improved. In terms of whether they're blighted or whether they are, we'll let the planners figure that out if it meets those criteria. But I do know that one of the criteria is that proximity to existing redevelopment area that this, my sense, would clearly meet. But again, it's the goal of this is to have the planners be able to do the study to see that it meets those thresholds.
Matt, I have a question. So, I mean, there's an obvious corner in Highland Park on South 2nd and Raritan that is like that former Sunoco gas station, the former like Krauser, BB Biggs, and that dry cleaners over there. I mean, those are like absolutely blighted. Has there been a study for that? And what would be the threshold for that, for the council to consider that in need of a study?
So one of the things that the council has one of the directions that the council has gone in terms of redevelopment is areas where the council has either ownership of a particular area or interest from the existing owner to do redevelopment. So we own the place next to Ubre's, right? And so we own the farmers market. So there is an attempt by the council to put into redevelopment areas places that we think that there is actually the potential to have significant redevelopment. At this point, that is not the case with Sunoco or BB Big. That's not the case with any of the owners in that particular area. And so we've decided that it's a better idea to look at the redevelopment in places that we feel we have more control over or more ability to be in the mix. Believe me, I understand Sunoco is blighted. I understand Sunoco is a problem, but the direction that we've decided to take is one where we have a seat at the table because we have an ownership interest or we have discussions with owners that they're interested in moving forward.
So I understand that both of those properties have two different owners, and I understand the complications with one, and I'm not sure that like what the level of engagement is with the other.
So there's one owner of Sunoco and there's one owner of BB.
Right.
And we've had regular ongoing discussions with them as long as I've been on council. And when I say regular, it's, we check in and say, what can we do? So I don't know more specific than that or how much more specific you want than that. So.
Well, no, I'm just curious, like, what, I understand what you're saying about what sets off the threshold in the borough's ownership stake in a particular property is where they are focusing their redevelopment attention, but just, wondering what redevelopment attention can we focus in that direction, because that is definitely a very high-profile, heavily trafficked corner that is in need of redevelopment.
And 100%
And perhaps, I mean, and I get that we have these like redevelopment without condemnation powers, but are there, I mean, should there be condemnation?
I think that would be a discussion with the borough council. My understanding currently of condemnation is that it is a very difficult and long process. Doesn't mean that we can't go there. We have decided at this point not to do that. In particular,
I understand it's a difficult and long process, but
Right.
longer than that place has just been sitting there empty.
Fair enough.
And just a point of order on the Sunoco station, there was a redevelopment plan before the board, bringing a two-story building to the avenue, and it was voted down because, in my mind, that no one wanted a 7-Eleven, which, to my mind, is not following the law, but that's what we did. So,
I think that might have been over a decade ago at this point.
I cannot
Yeah,
express
it was
to you,
before I
and I
joined the
think you
board.
heard my frustration earlier with Builder's Remedy and everything, like the difficulty of getting things done. And I really appreciate what, we're trying to do by focusing on those things that have a higher probability of success, because once that happens, it increases the value of the properties next door and will allow intransigent or whatever developers more of an incentive to do that. So, that's my historical perspective, but, I'm losing focus, sorry.
That's okay.
Sure,
Just
Jeff.
sticking with the Sunoco property, because I attended some of those planning board meetings. I thought it was approved, but with no curb cut. And the redevelop, no, I thought the planning board approved it.
No, I was.
With, okay.
Let me just
Okay.
explain that there were and we don't have to go in, there were variances that that the planning board felt that the builder did not meet standards on.
Right.
And everything met the letter of the law. But I know in my heart, if it had been a gourmet food store instead of a 7-Eleven, it would have passed like that. So I'll stop proselytizing and.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I agree that the development of the Sunoco station is something I think every resident in town would love to see, but I'm gonna draw everyone's attention back to
Yeah.
the referral
And
request
so-
from Borough
so
Council
speaking
to
of that-
do this
My apologies.
report on the other,
So,
the other blocks.
I apologize.
Sure,
Actually,
Jeff,
I just
go
have a
ahead.
question related to that. Since we do not have our planner here tonight. to
Yeah,
answer-
Chris, by the way, has strep throat. He
Yeah.
apologizes for not joining us.
I think you do hear from planning board members, there's questions about this referral. So, I mean, is it, I mean, are we really expected to take an action tonight, or can we defer it, the referral to another meeting?
I think we have an obligation under certain timeliness, if I'm not
Well,
mistaken.
I'll defer to Matt. I mean, what is, I mean, everything that is referred generally has timeframes, but those timeframes can be extended by the referring agency. So I guess the question is, in light of some of the comments, do you think it is worthwhile to allow this to be deferred for another month, or is there some urgency that you're aware of based upon the discussions that have taken place, that it would be better for this board to take an action today as opposed to waiting 30 days or thereabouts?
So obviously, taking action today would be preferable, but I understand if the planning board has not seen them or they're not in front of them, that they ought to be able to have a chance to read it. And I don't think that a 1 month delay in this is going to be that detrimental.
Thank
So.
you.
Yeah, sure.
I just have a quick question. What does it matter if they do the study or not?
Good question.
Well, I mean, you want to hear from the planner. I mean,
Yeah,
the
I want
planner's
to.
gonna- Let me finish,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
Okay.
The planner's going to say we're doing this study, and it's going to be done anyway, and if it's done or it's not done, what does it really matter? I mean, how does it affect the board?
Well, it's been referred to us. I mean, council is referring the planning board whether or not we should actually take an investigation, right? It's our responsibility under municipal land use law. We'll take the responsibility of doing the investigation. So, planning board members have some questions, about the circumstances of the referral, as we heard from another planning board member. So I understand, maybe council and members of the town want us to do this, but I have some questions too, and I'm thinking we should wait a month. So we
Scott,
can have-
I would.
Can I
would
just ask
point-
if
I can.
Go
I
ahead.
would point out that under the law, even notwithstanding the language of the resolution, the law does designate certain bodies to do certain things. And one of the things that is designated is that the governing body refers these matters to the planning board, and that's what they've done. But it is up to the planning board to initiate the study. And obviously, it would have been helpful to have Chris here, but he's not for obvious reasons, and that's just unfortunate because he's sick. But it is the responsibility of this board to initiate that. It's good to know that the council has already funded the money, but technically it is this board's responsibility. So I think that given what Matt has said, and given the fact that there are some questions, it might be in the long run beneficial to have some of those questions answered or clarified, and then a vote be taken.
All right, Dan, did you have a comment?
So I just want to offer, I guess, a conflicting perspective, because I feel like what the council has said is, let's do a study looking into these properties to see if it's appropriate to classify them a certain way. The questions that we would have about the appropriateness of that designation, the appropriateness of looking into it, that's going to be answered by the report on that question. I feel like the questions are going to be answered by the report rather than by
I
approving
do
the report.
agree with that perspective
Yeah,
about what the purpose of the report is. However, I am going to caution and just say, I recognize that members of the board may not have had time to look at the referral and the lots themselves, and I respect that. So respecting that, members of the board may want the time to look at the lots and what they are, because, you know, this feels a little bit like it got lost in the chaos of the last application. And if barring a stressor on getting this approval done tonight, we can afford to wait till the next meeting to look into it. So members of the board, we can recirculate the ordinance referral so members of the board can have the time to look at the lots. I will say personally, I don't disagree with your perspective on just getting the report done, but I also respect that if there's time for consideration, there's no reason not to take the time for consideration. So I would put this off to the next meeting, and we'll recirculate the resolution so everyone can have time to look at which lots we're being asked to look at.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just for my own clarity and understanding, when something is designated in need of redevelopment, does that make that area applicable for certain grants or funding if it's been designated a redevelopment area?
I think it does.
Okay.
It can.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I
but
believe the
it's
whole town.
complicated because it's already designated an area in need of rehabilitation.
Right, that's what I was about to
We already
say.
have certain, we can grant, for example, tax abatements. We can do a pilot.
Yes.
Without designated an area of non-condemnation redevelopment. So, you know, it's always a legitimate question, whether, since we've designated the entire town as an area in need of rehabilitation, whether there's an incremental benefit to declaring it an area in need of redevelopment. That does have consequences. There are certain kinds of financing that are only available for areas in need of redevelopment.
Correct.
But it's, you know, it's by no means a self-evident. The response to that is by no means self-evident. You know, it's more complicated than it might look.
Okay, so for this topic, we'll postpone it another 30 days. We'll recirculate the resolution to the members of the board, so you have time to look at the lot and blocks as may feel comfortable, and we'll review it again at our next meeting.
And presumably Chris will be here to maybe answer some of your questions.
All right, so,
If I could just make sure it's
Sure.
the first item on the
yeah, we'll put it over.
we don't get pushed for 2 months, because that would be a bit of a, you know.
Yes, sir.
Yes, and if we don't have anything else, fair warning, we're doing a lot of minutes, so come out and review your homework. That's what we're going to do. All right, so that being said, Scott, anything interesting to report around town?
We just going to have a new house built on North Fifth.
Oh, that's nice. We're in North Fifth.
Vacant lot.
Oh.
There's finally going to be a house there? Okay, fine.
Where's that, Scott? On Harrison?
No, in Fifth.
Yeah, going down towards London. We'll probably start the foundations.
It's across the street.
next week.
You know what they're building?
Yes, we're building a very large lot.
Okay, all right. Last chance for everyone. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up that we haven't already discussed? Nope. All right, then I'll solicit a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Second.
Seconded. Oh, sorry.
There's another public comment.
Oh, did we need to?
We do
Oh,
need to
I
open
do
it to the public.
apologize.
We
That
do need
it
to open
is.
it to the public for
I
items not on the agenda.
I do apologize. I'm so sorry. With that, I will open the meeting to the members of the public for items not on the agenda.
Okay, member of the public, identify yourself.
Thank you, Lois Lebbing, North Second Avenue. It's just a comment about what I recall from the Sunoco. It was 24/7, had to be. It was no time specified for delivery, like Rite Aid had a certain time they could park on the avenue and deliver. And they had to come in, enter the exit on 27, or it was, whatever it was backwards, park and block the handicap parking spaces on South Second side and offload. And they wouldn't lock in to a midnight to 4 or something like that. They refused to do it. So they were not flexible, and it had to be on that corner. So I think there was more to it. I don't remember if you were on. I know Mr. Williams was on the board, but it was lots and lots of meetings, and it was close, 4-3, and they lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Seeing no other members of the public who wanted to stay and chat with us, I'll close the public portion.